So at Apps for Good, we're actually optimists, but we're pragmatic optimists. We have a strong belief that technology is a great, powerful force that can actually transform the lives of people and communities anywhere around the world. And so what I get to do for my job every day is I work with people who are coming up with some of the most amazing ideas, solving a whole range of problems, and developing apps to tackle those problems. They're looking at a whole range. So it can be anything from looking at how to tackle bullying to really trying to address that problem. They're coming up with apps and solutions that are dealing with problems that really set London on fire a year ago. Looking at stop and search. How can people within the community understand their rights, connect, express their views on things? They're looking at issues that might be at the softer end of things. How do you keep from sleeping through your alarm so you can get to that job interview, so you can get into work on time? They're thinking about how we can eat more healthily. They're considering how we can revise more effectively. And one of the days that was one of the highlights of my time here at Apps for Good was back in June. There was an evening that we spent actually the whole day hearing teams pitch ideas, really creative ideas that were solving problems. They had to do a Dragon's Den pitch, they had to go into the marketplace, sell to the crowd, they had to go into the Barbican Cinema, they had to give a pitch from a room like this, 250 people, but they were being live streamed at the same time. Amazing evening. The panels of experts were on their feet with some of these ideas, really elegant, creative solutions that were coming through. And the best part of that? The average age of the people that were presenting that night was 14 years old. Not bad when you're 14 to sit in front of a group of 250 people. And if you look at our sort of stereotypes of teenagers, if you looked at the sorts of app ideas that these young people were coming up with, you had something like QBook. David has an idea that he understands that within the classroom, if you don't like reading, if you find reading difficult, that's a really hard place to be. And actually trying to ask for help from the teacher, hearing from the teacher, dealing with the questions and answers within the classroom can be really painful, really difficult. Unless you can use your smartphone to raise your questions, to answer the questions, to tell what you're finding difficult, and to get that praise in this really quiet, secret way. We've got girls who are looking at the idea that as teenagers, it's really hard to understand your own feelings, much less read those feelings of those around you. But what might it be like if we could take pictures, if we could share ideas, that if we could look in terms of crowdsourcing, social media, using a smartphone app to start to understand each other's feelings? Then there's a classic one. How many times as an adult have we broken a promise that we've made to young people? How many times have we then actually had the young person that we had to nag and chase to try and get that promise kept? Well, what would happen if there was an app that allowed us to agree a promise and send reminders to each other and encourage each other to keep those promises? These are the kinds of app ideas that young people are coming up with every single day. Now, on Sunday night, I just feel, this wasn't part of my original speech, but how many of you watched the thick of it on Sunday night? Can you raise your hands for a moment? Okay. I just want to hasten to add, if you haven't watched it, you can watch it. We are not Silicon Playground. We did not provide any creative consultancy for that thing, but what I would say is it's a great cautionary tale. It's a very funny episode, but it does talk about the difficulties of when you have a great idea if you get politicians involved. That's not what we do. One of the things that I would say is, having been a head teacher, for 20 years I've been in education, and I'm a mum as well, and we spend so much time trying to fix teenagers, to get them to learn the sorts of, think of those 3 apps that I talked to you about. In effect, we're talking about learning. We're talking about empathy. We're actually talking about morality if you're talking about keeping your promises. I mean, how many times have we tried to fix teenagers and teach teenagers that? And frankly, I don't know about you, got a lot of rolled eyes and less than patient sighs from those teenagers. But actually what was interesting is, given the chance, these young people are trying to fix it themselves. They're actually doing those things, finding those ways, those solutions that we try and do to them. And I think that's very important about Apps for Good. How do we do that? Apps for Good is actually an open source education program that we run. We work with educators, with students, and with experts who volunteer their time up and down the country. And we take young people and we put them in teams. One of the big prerequisites of what we do is we don't set the problem or challenge. We ask the young people to choose an issue, a problem that they care about, that matters to them. And then we help them go through a process that takes them from problem all the way through to a prototype for a smartphone app or for a Facebook app. Along the way, as they do this, they will learn the whole design process. They will go through problem definition. They will do market research. They will look at the user interface. They will hear from experts on a whole range of things, whether it be the business plan, the marketing, the user interface, thinking about how they market that and take that onto the piece. They learn to work within teams. They learn to put together a Dragon's Den pitch. They're really learning the whole range of what we would call those digital life skills that we will use maybe if they go into the technology industry, but they could also be looking at becoming entrepreneurs themselves, social entrepreneurs. In fact, we started out in this space thinking we just wanted to help young people become problem solvers. We think now that we have something, watching what they've done with the program, we're starting to use that phrase that Disney sort of brought into popularity a long time ago. Imagineers, have you come across that phrase? That idea that you can imagine a possible future and then have those skills to engineer that and bring that back down to earth and into reality. And that's what our young people are doing. We then have a national competition, as I said to you back in June, where the young people can put their ideas forward. We have sponsors that they will get a prize, an upfront prize. It might be an iPad, it might be tickets to a sporting event. But then what's quite exciting is we then take each of those winning teams and we find a team that will then design the app professionally and take it to market. And those young people at the ripe old age of 14 will have a smartphone app that they own, both the IP and any revenue that would come from that. So it's not too bad a start for a 14-year-old. When we do that, what did we learn? We had a good idea. We had a great idea. We did this 2 years ago. We did it in 2 centers with about 50 kids. It went down really, really well. But you probably, everyone in this room, know that when you start to then take an idea and try and take it forward, there's always a lot of people who are more than happy to tell you why it's not going to work. So what we had 2 years ago when we started looking at going forward was we were told how this couldn't possibly work. Because in fact, schools were going to be very, very risk averse. They were frightened of technology. It was only about exam results and league tables. This was going to be asking teachers to step out of the role of expert in the middle of the room and have to facilitate and have questions, bottoms-up learning. That could never possibly work. And frankly, even if it did, why would young people do that? At best, young people were just giving and becoming robots, spitting things out onto exams. If it wasn't for results, it wasn't going to matter. Or at worst, they were disengaged from young people, sitting around with their hoodies and their cell phones, starting fires and riots across London. How could we possibly make this work in a society where there's a double-dip recession? When experts, when business were only going to be looking at the bottom line and really wouldn't be willing to give of their time, their expertise, if it didn't add to that bottom line. You know as well as I do, if you have a good idea, there's always going to be people who will tell you why that can't possibly work. But did it? It certainly did. 2 years on, we now have had 10,000% growth. We've done that because we've had schools that have embraced us. Not, frankly, they've chased us. When I've gone up and down the country to find schools that have done that, we've grown now by 10,000%. Schools we thought would only be willing to do this as an after-school club, when in fact now, starting this September, 3/4 of my school are taking 5,000 students through as part of their IT curriculum. This is what they're learning in the classroom, day in, day out. We found that the teachers were doing the extra hours, were emailing in, were working over their summers and their evenings to try and do this and finding it really quite exciting. This was hard, this was different, this was technology, using technology in the classroom that a lot of their unions said they should never ever let in the classroom, but they were finding it exciting and powerful. We found that business was going to come outside, and what they've done is they've really transformed it. We have had not just companies who've offered their time and their money to us. We have experts. We made it easy to start with. This is something that our experts, when they volunteer, we have a website that allows them to connect with schools, and generally they Skype in. They don't even have to leave the office. You might be a little tiny tech startup in Tech City. You might be part of a large organization, maybe working from home. But what you could do is you could Skype into a classroom, give them a talk, give them advice on things. And we found every day we had more and more experts volunteering their time. They actually got quite keen. We had things like, if you think about, has anyone been up to Wigton, Cumbria? No. Now that you can be forgiven for. You don't end up there by accident. Wigton is the north of the north of the north of England. Keep driving, turn left, and keep driving north. What I had was an expert who was Skyping in from New York City. He's the global head of technology for Thomson Reuters. He started off Skyping into some of these schools. The kids got very excited at what he did. They started going at him on Twitter. Would he come and visit? So that I suddenly had his PA calling me from Atlanta, Georgia, saying that, Debbie, where is Wigton, Cumbria? Bob wants to pop up to Wigton, to go to Wigton. And I had to say, no one pops up to Wigton, Cumbria. But Bob did. We had experts who were coming out of their office to work with these young people because they could see the difference that it was making in education. They could see that they were excited about getting involved with some of these ideas, finding solutions coming about from these young people because they tackled problems in a way that they'd not seen before. And it made such a difference that we then found when we ran our national competition, all our experts had to do was shortlist 2 teams and show up on the day. We actually had bun fights going on because the experts were saying, but I want to mentor that team. I'm going to get that team ready for the competition. We're going to do this. On the day of the competition, when they were giving awards, we had experts taking us aside and saying, okay, I know it's rule breaking and this team hasn't won, but we'd still like to try and find a way of getting them to market because we think they've got a fantastic solution. And that's been Apps for Good. So the young people then, what did they do? What we found really, really powerful was that the young people weren't just exam factories, that they wanted to work with this, that they wanted to come outside the box. They spend the first few weeks, we reassure our teachers, you're doing the course right. If the kids say to you in the first 3 weeks, Miss, this is hard, this is difficult. They coped with the idea of failing. They had to sometimes find out that their fantastic idea was already out on the market, and they had to learn about lean startup and pivoting their solution. They had to learn sometimes that when they went out and did their market research that the user didn't agree with their initial interpretation, and they had to pivot and learn. What I think was most powerful, though, if you look in the center of the screen, the boy pointing, that team lost on the evening. They didn't win their category. When they were traveling back down to their school in Brighton, they were talking to the teacher, and one of the other people on the team said, sir, are we just going to repeat the course? Are we going to do this again next year? The lad that you see in the picture, apparently his comment was, we don't need to. We've got the idea, the know-how, and we now have the business cards. We've got the networking. We can do this ourselves. That's success. We know that one of the teams up in Wigton, Cumbria, that didn't even make it as a finalist is currently trying to crowdsource their app to take it to market. That's success. The young people are hungry for this. You saw that today when you were hearing about what happens on Sesame Street and you heard what happens at that graduate level. Young people hungry for the opportunity, wanting to know and knowing that their learning comes to life when it becomes real, when it's grounded in the real world. And that's what we're seeing day in, day out. They are reaching for this, they are grabbing it. I think one of the most powerful things that we've learned is that people will do what's hard. They're interested in doing what's hard, and they will always underestimate how hard it is. So what takes them through it? The triangle you see here, I think, is the thing that we too often do when we think about teaching young people. We spend a lot of time, and this isn't just here in the UK, I hear this a lot of time, we spend a lot of agonizing thinking about what are we going to teach people? What is going to be in the curriculum? What will we test them on at the end of the day? We will spend a great deal of time thinking about the how, the pedagogy. Teachers, we love talking about pedagogy, the how that we will do that. Somewhere down along the line, we think about why. And what we found about at Apps for Good is actually people will learn, and people will learn what's hard, and they will try and learn themselves if you let them own the why. And I think that's what's powerful about Apps for Good. The young people are not learning these skills. They're not picking up the coding skills. They're not learning about business planning. They're not learning about how to pivot and lean startup because we've told them to. They're learning it even though it's hard because they know that it's for their idea, the problem that they own and that they feel passionate about. And then it's about thinking, the last thing we've learned is when you have a great idea, be prepared to listen, to pivot, to change your mind, and as necessary, get out of the way. We thought when we started this was going to be a club. It became a course. We thought we were just trying to shape problem solvers. We found out that we're starting to see a generation of Imagineers that when they've done it well, don't feel they know us. And what we've also found is that we've had more and more people we could never afford to pay on staff, who are working with us, and they help us step back and look at what's happening. And what's being reported to us is they think within Apps for Good, what we're finding is that we're not just a course. We may have the beginnings of a movement. Because what we find is students who want to carry on, experts who want to do more, that this is about something that is more than just a program. And in doing that, it's because of the boldness of what we're trying to do. In letting people begin and letting young people at such a young age begin to take control of the why of their learning, to see that they can solve their own problems, and that in fact they might begin to effect change, not just learn as a consumer, but as a creator. Not just to use tools, but to create the tools necessary to go on. So we have one of the people who works with us is Chris Moss. He's one of the brains that was behind things like the 118 campaign, Virgin, Orange, etc. And when I said that I was going to be talking today, and I was trying to think of a way of phrasing what's been happening within Apps for Good, when we see ourselves becoming that movement, what's happening within the space with these young people, he reminded me of a quote that I'd come about before. And it's a quote you've probably seen before by Goethe. And it's about that boldness when you have something happening. And I'm not even suggesting that it's just Apps for Good that has that boldness. It's the young people. It's the young people who begin to have that vision, that idea that they want to move on. And that once you do that, the barriers begin shifting and moving. And the powerful part about the evening that I think that he referred to is the closing part of that quote where he talks about the boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. And his comment to us was anyone who'd been there on that June night, watching people like David talk about their ideas, realize that what we're able to do at Apps for Good is to begin to unlock that genius, that power, and that magic. And that's why I sit here tonight of don't tell the boss, but I've got the best job in the world at Apps for Good. Thank you.